Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another fantastic Cyphren security-focused interview. With me today, we have Zach, or obront.eth. Am I saying that right? Obront.eth, whose title on... What's that?
You got it.
I got it. All right, great. Whose title on Twitter is Bug Huntoor. And we are incredibly excited to have him here. Recently, he just finished up the Vyper Competitive Audit on the Codehawks platform and had over 26 submissions, or you had 26 submissions. So some crazy number of submissions. He's been a security researcher in the field for a number of years now. He's done some phenomenal work on many different competitive audits, on many different private audits. He's done cool stuff with formal verification, with Halmos, and you should definitely follow him on Twitter because he's got a lot of really cool stuff. So today we're going to be talking with him and going over any and all of that. So how you doing today?
Excellent. You make me sound very impressive.
Well, I mean, I think your background's pretty impressive. One of the things that I think I pinged you about this earlier was back in March or something. You were posting, like, you were doing formal verification with Halmos on Solady and Soulmate. Is that right? We're gonna just jump in super technical, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, just like, stuff like that is impressive. You did phenomenal work on the Optimism Bedrock audit. You would trust. Obviously, I'm excited to be judging your Vyper submissions. Yeah, you have an impressive background, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Where do you? I want to ask about all of them.
Stuff was fun, actually. This lady stuff was fun. I've done a few audits with sound.xyz, which is like where Vectorize works, and so obviously they're using all of the Solady libraries. So you want to assume that those libraries kind of work and they're out of scope. And he's pretty thorough with testing, where I'm like, I assume that a lot of this stuff works. But as I was getting towards the edge of the audit, it's like, oh, I want to make sure some of this stuff. And they raise money from Andreessen. So we're kind of in the group chat with all the A16Z people who developed Halmos. And they're kind of poking at some of it. And so that was my first introduction to it, where I was like, if I want to make sure this square root function is perfect, I could try to just fuzz it a bunch, but this magical tool seems to be able to say for sure that it's true. And so that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of like, what can we prove for sure, and what's beyond the scope of formal verification right now?
Yeah. So what? And I know we talked about this a little bit over chat. So what did you formal verification? I feel like that's kind of like a polarizing thing. What did you feel the outcome was? Working with Halmos, working with these tools.
Yeah.
How did you feel formal verification felt like compared to fuzzing or just manual review?
It feels really different. So my like first experience with this stuff was actually before. It was like right when I got into security. I had some weird pull towards formal verification. There was like something satisfying about that, like definitive proof. So I spent a ton of time doing TLA plus, which is like a language that was developed purely for formally verifying almost like specs before code is written, but you could also go the other way and kind of turn code into it. And honestly, it didn't end up being that useful, because the one thing you'll learn if you do more formal verification is like the scope of what you can verify is relatively small. Like it just like runs out of the power to do it if things are getting too complex. So a lot of times I'd like work really hard on some big model that's like, this could prove that nothing can be broken. And then it runs for 24 hours and doesn't get anywhere. And it's like, okay, that wasn't useful. But it really changed the way that I saw everything security wise. So I was forced to say, okay, I've got this Solidity function. How do I translate that into something that is a form? And like TLA plus is like basically a math language. Like you're just writing one big logical statement and it's seeing what's possible from there. So it forced me to say like, oh, every function is just a bunch of paths that change state in different ways. And if I have to put that into formal reasoning, I can also kind of do that in my head. So for a long time, I didn't touch any formal tools, but I was like, wow, that was impactful to do. It was changed the way I see a lot of this. And then Halmos was like the unlock for me of like, it's so ergonomic and like comfortable because it's just Foundry tests. And so I now try to basically inject it. If I have like a scope down small thing that I want to make sure is like rock solid against any edge cases, the times where I would normally just like crank up the fuzzer to a ton of runs, it's like my better alternative for that for the most part.
Really? So how often does that methodology find bugs for you? How often are you, all right, cool, like Halmos is finding the issue as opposed to the fuzzer?
Um, mm, in most cases, honestly, the fuzzer cranked up catches the thing that Halmos would have caught. But if I'm, but Halmos also runs just as fast or faster. So it's kind of like,
Mm,
especially if I'm doing like for Vyper, the place where I used it most was the optimizations at the IR level. So that's like a bunch of clever shit that says like we if one side is a variable and the other side is zero, and we're adding the two sides together, then we can just change it to the variable. It's like, okay, that one we're pretty sure that's not wrong. But there's probably 50 of those. And so putting those into Solidity assembly and basically running them in Halmos as like, is this true always? Halmos is amazing at those, and it will be faster than a fuzzer and will tell me that like, I didn't need to crank it up to more fuzz runs. It's definitively right.
mm,
Um, so I just kind of like, there's no setup, there's no anything. It's installed. It's like a Python package installed globally. And so if I'm kind of reaching for the keyboard to run a test like that, I just type Helmos instead.
mm. Gotcha. So basically, the summary here is like, okay, sometimes when I want to just crank a fuzzer and I want to just kind of sit there and wait for the fuzzer to run, maybe it's a better use of time where we run Halmos real quick. Hey, is there a bug? And if Halmos comes back and goes, yeah, there's a bug, you didn't have to wait around for 5 minutes, 10
Yeah.
minutes for the fuzzer to finish.
Yeah. There's also kind of a thing that I haven't experienced a whole lot, but it's one of the big powers of it. And it's something I busted my ass trying to make this work for Vyper and couldn't
Mm,
get it there, but I might still work on it a little, which is like,
sweet.
okay, imagine a situation where you have a contract and you want to throw random call data at it and see what happens. There's no way that the fuzzer is going to like guess the function signature
Right.
and guess all the call. Like, it's too many things, right? It's impossible for
Yeah.
it to get there. But because of the way the formal verification works, where it's basically just dividing the state space into like, which places does this happen versus which places does that happen, such things like that aren't actually that hard for it.
Yeah.
And so the like pipeline I was trying to build that I couldn't get to was, I want to take a Vyper contract, compile it with an old version, compile it with the new version, and compile it with the new version with optimizations on. And all of those,
Mm,
they're going to make different bytecode. So I can't just compare the bytecode. But if you call a function on them, at the
right.
end of that function, the return value and all the states should be the same on all of them. None of those things should change.
Mhm.
And so I was trying to say, can we like compile those three things, and then can we use formal verification, Helmo specifically, to say, is there any state in which these would end up different? And Helmos was not quite at the level where it could do that yet. There's some tweaks that would need
Right.
to be made, but it's close. Whereas fuzzing's not even close at all. So I think there's like I think Karma Coma had like a thread at one point about some CTF. There was a similar situation. It's like, there's one answer. You're not going to get it by fuzzing 2 to
Right.
the 256 possibilities, but Helmos can divide the state up to get it pretty quickly.
Right. Unless you have like a crazy smart fuzzer. I think that was like the purpose behind like Trilobit's like
Right.
optic, but that might be a whole
Yeah.
other conversation.
I
So
don't
so
know.
you
I
were
don't know a whole lot about how they're picking those, but I think there's certain problems that kind of elude it in some way, where like there isn't a clue in the code as to
right.
where to focus. You know?
Yeah, like I have a demo coming up on my security course where yeah, like if you're doing some really bizarre math, right? The fuzzer is looking at storage, it's looking at opcodes, it's just hey, it's looking for something to latch onto to
Right.
pick its random seeds. I think, but yeah, Trail of Bits was doing something really interesting where they were trying to combine like FV with fuzzing, where they ran like FV for like a little bit just to try to make
Yeah.
the fuzzing picking. But yeah, I might be talking
No,
nonsense
no,
here,
but
but
I think all these things are really interesting. Where like
yeah,
these tools, rather than being used as a like answer, are used for like the slice where they're useful. Like, this is where
right, yeah,
I think
yeah, yeah,
almost all AI security stuff is useless right now. But I think the first
agreed,
wave of it being useful will be when people are able to basically design it to surface ideas to other tools, right? And
yeah,
have those going to be automated in some way. So like, I think like there's something interesting there about like putting the tools in their lane and allowing them to work together, as opposed to thinking that
yeah.
they should solve it.
That's actually really interesting. Like, imagine a fuzzer, but the AI picks the
Right.
the random seed. That would actually be, somebody build that. All right, whoever's watching this, go build that. That sounds sick. Because then you could have a much more intelligent fuzzer. It could kind of try to figure out states of the function that just like a regular kind of dumb fuzzer just looking at like storage would be able to find out. That's really cool.
Right.
So I want to ask more about the Vyper pipeline that you were building, because while you were doing it, we talked a little bit. You were like, yo, like I got this crazy pipeline I'm building. It was super it was super fun to like watch how excited you got about it. So how often have you done like this was basically like a differential test, right? A formally verified differential test. How often have you done something like this? Was this your first foray into doing something crazy like this? Where did you get the experience to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, when I was doing some of the Hamo stuff with Solidity. So one of the problems you run into is formal verification is very bad at division and like mod operations and bit shifts. Like it's got its things that are hard to encode into algebra, and so the solution to that is that, or I guess the best possible solution is that rather than saying, is this right all the time, you can take some other implementation that you trust and say, are these two equivalent? So I was doing that with Soulmate a bit, and then specifically saying, okay, the bottom slice, if you look at how a lot of these, what was it, like I think a square root function, if you look at how they run, they're using this like Babylonian method, does a ton of division at the end. And I could see that Solidity and Soulmate had identical divisions at the end. So if the minute before that, or the step before that, they were equivalent, then we knew they'd be equivalent at the end. And so I was able to kind of carve them up and do this equivalence test of just, hey, are you the same on the first half? And then we know you'll be the same in the second half. So that was like the best we could come up with as a short-term, easy to run thing to say like some proofs that this works. If Soulmate works, we know that they're equivalent because the tops are proven equivalent and the bottoms are identical. Right. But I haven't done a whole lot like that. The reason is that often it feels like a data problem. When I started with Vyper, I think the reason I was so excited is I started off being like, okay, if I want to do some equivalence testing, I guess I need to have Solidity contracts that should be equivalent to Vyper contracts, and then I can compile both and then prove that they're equivalent. And actually, I don't know if I told you this, I paid a guy to start writing Solidity contracts that would be identical to Vyper contracts so that I could have this database to run it on.
All right, is this the alpha? You just like got to pay somebody else to do a lot of the grunt work, so you do the security.
I limited time on the contest. I wasn't going to be writing some Solidity. So I started running those, and it's like, there's so few contracts. Like, if I'm going to surface a fucking bug in Vyper that isn't something that's fundamentally not working right, I need to run this on 1,000 things, not like 15. And that are weird edge cases. Like, it just didn't make sense. And so the like aha moment was like, oh, if I can just take one Vyper contract and split it by compiling it myself in different ways, then I can basically just scrape mainnet for every Vyper contract and run it on all of them. And that's like, we've solved the bottleneck to this, which is like data that will give something. And so I would say I burned like over a week cumulatively of the contest on this. I probably spent like 40, 50 hours on it and didn't get anything out of it. But I put it on GitHub. Hopefully someone else will run with it at some point. But I, even up to like, I don't know when we were talking about it, maybe like 3-4 weeks into the contest, I was like, this is going to be the thing. I'm like 2 days away from being able to run it. And then the last week was like, oh shit, I better do some more manual work because I got to catch up from relying on that so much.
Damn. So like that, to me, that's like really interesting when you're doing a competitive audit, right? With such, I feel like they all are often so time restricted. You said you burned a week, right? I feel like that's like a pretty common thing. A lot of competitive auditors say like, oh, I burned a week going down this rabbit hole that netted nothing. Yeah. And something that we talked a lot about was, especially during these competitive audits, was picking the paths that have the most probable bugs in them, right? You're optimizing for time in these competitive audits as opposed to like a private audit where it's like, all right, I'm going to take my time, try to go down every single path or as many paths as possible. Do you have a process for picking a path, for knowing, okay, yes, I am going to burn a week on making this crazy pipeline, or you know what, screw that, I'm going to do this manual review? How do you pick the path to go down?
Yeah, it's really hard. I don't think I'm particularly good at it because I usually don't feel like I need to do it. I'm like, My nature is to be incredibly fast, and honestly, security has been the biggest slowdown factor for me. That's like, okay, I only do well if I move slow, but slow for me is still like I never run out of time. So like the amount of time that is scoped for an audit or for a competitive audit, whatever, I finish when I'm done, and not when the clock runs out. And what I learned early on, I'd be like, but there's 2 competitive audits this week, so like I could do them both half the time. I don't make 50% as much. I make like 5% as much and succeed 5% as much. You know, it's like
right.
a big breakthrough for me was like when I was starting, I'd do like 2 contests a week. And that was probably good for learning. But what I found was like the second half of that week, if I stayed on the first one, I was finding bugs constantly. Like it was money, but I didn't feel as productive because I wasn't like making sense of it. And I was like, I could move on because I could be done with this. And so it took a shift to just be like, no, that's the useful time. Everything else is just setting up for that. So now I feel like I've slowed down and I'm going slow, but it's still like, it's still the case that like I'm exhausting every path. And so this was a huge challenge for me because like 5 weeks of focus on it, 15,000 lines of code or whatever it was, like, and they're dense. I'm not going down every path. So there's a lot more of those trade-offs. And honestly, I just ended up working a lot more because I'm like, I can't stand to not go down this path. I have to make time for it.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, this was definitely one of the most challenging competitive audits I feel like out there, right? Because it's literally a compiler, right? All contracts stem from this thing, super dense code base. Makes a lot of sense to me. So
it's also because it's so battle tested. There's like an interesting dynamic where for most contests, I'll do like a relatively slow first pass where like half of my motivation is make sense of it, but I'm also finding a lot of bugs along the way. And when I finished my first pass of this, first of all, the first pass took like 2.5 weeks. Fucking long, complicated. I had like nothing. Like every rabbit hole I went down as I was looking were dead ends. Like the amount of frustration I had in that 2.5 weeks because I'd like spend a day on like, okay, now I know I've got something and it wouldn't work. Right. And it's just like anything that's obvious has been found already, right? Like this is a compiler that's been used for years by a lot of big projects. Like there aren't the low-hanging fruit things you would find in a normal audit. So it took getting back into the like, okay, now I understand the whole code base. Let me try to get creative to end up being able to find some useful stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So I do want to come back to that, but I think you were saying something that I think would be really helpful to a lot of people watching. So when you started, when did you actually start doing competitive audits?
So last summer, I like did a few and I was horrible at it. I was doing dev work, so I was just like doing them on the side. And then last September was when I started taking it seriously.
So you weren't doing security before this?
No.
What were you doing before this?
I was doing Solidity dev work for like a year before that. And then I ran a nonfiction book publishing company for 10 years before that.
So you've not like the security thing is like kind of new for you.
Very new to me. Yeah.
What? I was not expecting that. So you were not like an engineer. You were not a security researcher before, 2 years ago. Wow. Right. How is
I took a year sabbatical from my company to focus on AI language models. This was in late 2020. And halfway through the year, I kind of got bored and started playing with some crypto stuff. And I was like, this is way more fun.
What?
And so kind of like fucked around with it with the plan to go back and start a company in this space. And then by the end of the year was like, I like the tech side a lot more than the business running side. I got to like keep seeing where it goes. But yeah, it's still relatively new to me.
Wow. So, I mean, a million more questions just came to head. How has the journey been? I guess, what's that transition like going from doing book publishing to like, okay, now you're like one of the sickest security researchers in the crypto space?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
I got you.
It's really different. I mean, I think for me, it was also really hard because like a lot of my identity was based on being like my like feelings of success were a different variety of success. It was like deals closing or company growth or whatever. and had spent years basically pulling myself out of caring about my like individual contribution, because the company, by the time I left, the company is 120 people. So I'd like had to work on being like more in a leadership role, which has its positives, but also I don't like as much. So it took a lot of like deprogramming to get myself back to like, no, I'm not having to be like a role model for other people. I'm not needing to care about anyone else's output. All that matters is like doing work that is good and having success with that. And so it was like really fun at first, like empty calendar, just get to like go all in on learning. Yeah, I don't know. I love it. It's like I got into this when I left the company. My plan was like, I'm like mini retirement, see what I want to do next. And this was just like, what's the most fun thing I can do while I'm screwing around deciding what to do next. And then it was just I was so obsessed I couldn't stop.
That's such a wild journey to me. So you'd never done any engineering, any security beforehand?
Definitely not security. I like learned a bit of like code on the side, but could never justify it. Like I'd be like up at night building like tools for our team, and I'd come in and be like,
Right,
guys, look, I built this like AI transcription engine that's going to save us like 200 grand a year. Everyone's like, can you please do your fucking job? Like we really need you to do other things. We could
right.
we could hire engineers. Like, so I was just always getting yelled at not to do it. So the
Oh my
sabbatical was
God.
kind of making like I'm allowed to take it seriously. No one can yell at me for it. So yeah, I like had and honestly, man, I don't know, when I talk to people who are good at this, often there's like more of a technical background. Often there's not, but there seems to be a common thread in the like way of thinking being present in their life before. Like 0x52 is like showed me like some of the like games he used to play that was like basically like do security, but you're a 16-year-old playing video games, you know?
Right.
And I look back, I'm like, I'll give you one example actually that's kind of fun.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
when I
yeah.
was summer after my freshman year of college, so I was like whatever 18, 19, I somehow got this internship at I lived in Canada, so like the biggest bank in Canada. I got this internship at, and like they didn't really know what they're like. Oh, we got a bunch of these interns. We'll figure out what to do with them. After a bunch of these conversations, they stuck me for the whole summer. They had a referral program for I forget who, like branch managers, bringing in new projects, like whatever. They had some referral program, and they ended up just giving me the documents and saying, "Can you figure out how they can scam us?" And then so we can update the referral program. And they like relied on me to solve this whole problem. And so like I tend to be good at this, like that kind of thing, whatever the word for that is. So when I first started playing with some of the security stuff, it was like, oh, I'm not quite ready for this technically, but I know it's like it fits my brain well. And so I just need to like fill in the gaps, and then it's going to start clicking. And that's kind of what happened.
So basically, since then, it's kind of been a weird video game of just like, all right, crush the bugs. Since you just find the bugs in this weird legal document.
Yeah.
Part of me is like, did that make you think, oh, maybe I'll like go into law? Find the loophole. Find the tax shelter.
So yes, it crossed my mind at times. There's like you watch Suits and you're like, yeah, that looks fun. That's like the reality of law. I got lawyers in my family. Like I know what it looks like for real. I think like I don't do well with like waiting for permission to try my hardest. And I feel like a lot of a law career is that.
Yep. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And I have, this is probably not fair, but I have a little bit of judgment for, and this isn't true of all law, but I have a little bit of judgment for like areas of work that are like not contributing to the actual thing. They're like ancillary to it.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I'm sure like society would fall apart without that, right? But there's like something that feels unsatisfying to me of like, we're all playing a game because there were rules set up that we have to beat, as opposed to like, there's a problem and we got to solve it.
Right. Whereas, I would, agree. The security mindset, the developer mindset, where you can just go in and fix shit right away.
Yeah. It's so fucking good. Like, yeah, I mean, I think like there's a lot of areas where you could be like, oh, like this skill could be useful, whatever. But like, what world exists that's better than this? Just like fun people, everyone's kind, permissionless, everything, like be actually useful, like stop things that are bad from happening, like really flexible. Interesting tech, like everything about it is just so good.
One of the things that I thought was so cool when talking to you when you were starting the Vyper thing is I'm gonna tell you. Can I tell them your first reaction when I was like, "Hey, can you do the Vyper contest?"
I don't remember it, but yeah, you can say whatever.
All
I
right,
don't care.
all right, cool, it's fine. I promise it's not anything weird. I was like, "Hey, man, like we're looking for some competitive auditors through the Vyper contest. I saw what you did with blah 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 with whatever. Would love to have you come." And you're like, "Oh, like I'm kind of busy, blah blah blah. Let me just take a peek under the hood." And then like after 5 minutes, you come back and you're like, "This looks so fun." Like that was those are what you're like, "This looks so fun." You're like, "Oh my god, like look at this code base." And like that curiosity, that like excitement you get from like, wow, I can just jump on this and I can go crazy. Like, is that something? So you said like you can kind of spot the thing in people, the people who are good at this. Is that excitement something that is also you think important for the people who get good at this? Being like, wow, like look at this game, look, I can be a part of this philosophy that you're talking about. Like, oh, I can
Yeah.
just jump in and do stuff. Is that all part of what you think it takes to be really good at this?
I mean, I feel like that's kind of what it takes to be good at anything. Maybe I'm wrong, but like, I don't know. I was like talking to a bunch of people about this when the ZK Sync contest was announced, and like everyone's like, "Oh, I'm gonna learn ZK," and quick, there's five
Right.
days left, and it's like
Right.
somebody thought this was the nerdiest, most fascinating thing 20 years ago. Someone else thought it was interesting like a year ago. Both of those people, like, you're not going to compete with them when you think there's an opportunity. You're going to compete when you're in your lane. And so, like, I feel on the one hand, like, oh my God, how did I get so lucky that I stumbled into work that I happen to feel this excited about? And on the other hand, it was like, no, I floated around for a year trying to do things and waiting for something that felt this exciting, and then it just feels easy. So I think it's really hard when people get into something because they think it's an opportunity, and then they try to like grind out competing with people who got into it when they didn't think it was an opportunity, because like it's just in a different mind space.
Right. You're competing with somebody who does it for a job versus somebody who does it for fun. Person who's doing it for fun, they got a whole lot easier job because they're like, oh yeah, like I'm addicted to this. I love this. Right. It's
Right.
very difficult.
Yeah. When I talked to Andy on his podcast, maybe I got it must be like 6-8 months ago now, and he was like, "How do you like?" So like people ask these kind of questions like, "How do you stay motivated?" And I was like, I can't fucking answer that question. I don't know. I just like don't want to do anything else. I want to spend time with my kids, so I rip myself away from it. There's my there's my talent.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So okay, so you kind of stumbled into this. You started doing 2 a week. You realized 2 a week, that doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to do one because all the bugs are kind of in this latter half. What happened next? So did you just start winning more and more? You start doing more private audits. You start doing bug hunts. Like how
No,
did you go?
so basically like September of last year, I was doing 2 a week. But even then it was like, so September 1st was when I was like, all right, I'm taking this serious. It was actually a DeFi Security Summit last year. And then
Nice.
Paradigm CTF the same like week. I was like, all right,
Nice.
this stuff's too fun. I got to like drop the dev projects. I said no to a few things. I was like, I'm just going to give this a few months, see like what it looks like if I take it seriously. And so in that 2 months, in that 1 month, I was working with a guy, Throttle, on all of them. And we won one, came second and third in a bunch. So it was like, okay, I don't feel like I'm like amazing at this, but like, it's like starting to click. And then October, I guess Sherlock launched, or Sherlock, it launched in September, but I like started to see more stuff pop up. And I was like, well, this seems like it's new. Let me just see if I can get to the top of the leaderboard with this. And I think I came first or second in like 8 or 10 Sherlock contests in a row. And the few code arenas I'd done in that period, kind of same thing. So it was like, all right, now it's like hitting, and I feel like I can do this kind of like consistently. Never any private audits at that point. Just like the contests are good. And like, especially if once you can get up to Sherlock Senior, it's like, okay, now I've got the flat fee anyways. And then beginning of this year, same thing. So like didn't do a single, I don't think I did my first private audit till this May, like after Optimism, after everything. I was like, I want to do the contest. Like they pay well. I've got the adrenaline thing. It's like, this is fun. And then, or actually I'd done a few, I did one with Spearbit before that. So I think I'd done a few here and there, but not much. And I much prefer like the Optimism things. Like, all right, there's a big prize pool, get to have a friend to work with and like go take it super seriously and then like all right, I did my best, I'm out. There's something kind of like fun and satisfying with that. Sorry, the lights keep turning off.
No, you're good.
And then, then like a lot more private audit interest came in, and I had some complicated personal stuff over the summer. And so it was like, okay, I don't need more of the adrenaline roller coaster ride from work as well. I can just like have work be like hard but stable, and then have some emotional capacity for other stuff. So I've been doing mostly private audits since then. And now I don't know. I'm still deciding what I want to do now. I've done like a few little drops into more of like the bounty hunting stuff. And if I calculate hourly, it's probably the best return I've had of anything.
Really?
But fuck the inconsistencies. It's fun, but it's also like hard to go weeks without finding anything. And weeks is like optimistic. So I'm still deciding how I want to play it exactly. I've been working with Aztec on a bunch of stuff, and I'm like obsessed with Noir and like everything that they can happen there. So I'm doing like a little kind of like cycle with them as well. So I don't know. We'll see where it goes, but I'm like juggling a few of those things.
Do you think that most security researchers at the top of their game, or at the top of the game, eventually get out of the competitive audit scene and then say, hey, you know what, private audit's more stable. I don't have to fight with people. Do you feel like that's kind of just the norm for security researchers?
It's hard to avoid that. Because like, I feel pretty comfortable that if I do a competitive audit, I'll usually come first, but that still doesn't like hit my weekly rate that I get from a private audit, unless I do like really, like I think like the average is lower. Sherlock's the one exception. Like having the flat fee as a base, I've now like this year I've probably done 7 or 8 Sherlock contests, and Optimism's kind of the weird one because like the prize pool is so much bigger. But cut that out, so I've come first in all of them, and I've gotten about between like 25 and 40% of the pot in all of them. So it seems to be pretty consistent that like that's what I can do if I try my hardest, given that there's a bunch of other people, even including some like the 0x splits one. I found every single issue, but there's dupes on a bunch of them. So like there's only so much you can do. So with Sherlock, with the flat fee plus that, I come out around or slightly higher than my like weekly audit rate. Any other contest, like I don't think I can justify spending enough time on it. So it's like hard to decide to do it. Yeah.
So something that I think is really interesting. Where do you think so like, let's say somebody starts as a competitive auditor. It sounds like you're doing where you are because you can show up to competitive audit, you can win, you kind of get your pick of the litter. For a lot of people who, at the end of the day, it's a zero-sum game, right? Where do you think a lot of those people who are really good competitive auditors, but not good enough to like win every single one, what do you think their best route is? Their next best career path? Do you think it's doing bug hunts? Is it private audits? Is it doing some type of mix? What do you think is, I guess this is kind of like advice for all the security researchers watching who want to make it, I want to get to the top.
I mean, that's so hard. Yeah, it depends on like what the top means, right? Like if it's, I think everyone, like what everyone's goal is very different. So like there's like which path is going to make you improve fastest if you want to try to be like, my preference right now is like, you saw how I responded to the fucking Vyper compiler. Clearly not my best like return per hour. But I want to like do stuff that feels hard, even if it's not going to be my like most income. Same reason that I like to partner with people on stuff, because I'm going to learn from them, even though like we're not going to earn as much. It's fine. And so like that's one mindset. It's different than saying, how do I optimize for revenue? And like if I'm optimizing for revenue, then the question is like, there's an interesting parallel. So in the book world, the way you get advances from publishers is they're trying to like ballpark your sales, and then you earn a percentage of royalties up until you hit your advance, or like you don't earn it up until you hit your advance, and then you start making royalties on top. And so the game is like, if you get an advance that's big enough that you never earn it out, that means you like won the negotiation against the publisher. It also means your book might have failed, but like you captured more than the value you created. Whereas if you're earning royalties, that's great. Your book did well, but like you didn't capture as much value. And so I think there's like a marketing piece in private audits too, which is like your value in terms of bugs you can find is pretty well represented by contests and bug bounties. And then whether or not to do private audits is kind of like, does your marketing outpace your ability? So it's why, like, I don't think it's my best expected value. I think like bug bounties and Sherlock and the really big Code Hawks or Code Arena contests is like my best expected value. And I'll probably lean that way unless it's a period of life where I value stability and calmness more than like upside and excitement.
Right.
Whereas I think for some people it's the opposite. It's like, hey, I can't do that well in contests, but I'm good at communication. I make clients feel understood. I'm like very supportive and good and consultative. I'm good at marketing. Cool. I'm like, I can earn more from that direction. I think it's just like, it depends on what people want.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Everyone listening, I feel like these are words to hang off of. Zach's giving us the philosophies of life almost a little bit here. This is not a security researcher call. This is a philosophy of life call. No, we can get back to some more security research stuff. I would love to double tap into the Vyper stuff. So I feel like there were so many different directions to go in that contest, and like, you know, we had a quick couple chats, Charles as well, where you were saying, oh, I'm going down this path, I'm going down this path, I'm going down so many different paths. How was auditing like Vyper, like a compiler, or doing a security review on a compiler different from, you know, everything else that you've done?
It's really different. I think the biggest thing besides the like size and complexity is
Mike wants more life philosophy, actually, so maybe we'll do more of that. No, sorry, keep going.
That'll be part 2. The like making sense of the system takes a long time longer, right? And there's so much that you have to kind of like assume works at that size and scale. So I feel like a lot of what I don't think I'm particularly well suited for it, honestly. I did okay, but I think like what I'm good at is when a system is like fully loaded into my head to be like, kind of do the formal verification, you know, like, is there one path through this that skirts around everything? And you can't really do that with Vyper. It's like, it's too big. And honestly, in a compiler, they're not like trying to save gas or anything. So like, there's just so many redundant checks that you're not like slipping something through all the checks that shouldn't have been caught. And for the most part, like, the person using it is the developer who's not trying to slip things through. So like, just for a lot of and if it breaks, like, one thing I found was the way that constants work, they take the value, they sub it in everywhere where the variable is, and then they delete the so like a constant doesn't exist in the compiled bytecode, it's just plugged in everywhere. But so like when they delete that, if they haven't subbed it in everywhere, then it's just gone. And so I found a way that certain types, if they're handled the wrong way, don't get subbed in, then they get deleted. Seems like a big deal, but anything that just breaks at compile time is not that bad. You know, so like you do that, and then what happens is it tries to build the intermediate representation, and it says, point to this variable. Wait, there's no variable. This breaks, shut down. And so like a lot of these things that felt really clever and got me excited were like, it's actually not a big deal. And so it's just it's a different mindset. The thing that felt most similar was when I could get into the IR building or the built-in functions and see this is turning into this assembly. And then it was basically like I was auditing Cport. You know, it's like I'm auditing assembly code.
Right.
This feels a lot more like I'm at home. Like, what could go wrong in this assembly code? Whereas, when we're in the like parsing it into the abstract syntax tree and then converting that, doing checks on that, I'm like, I don't have the encyclopedic knowledge of all the types that could exist in the AST and how they're annotated and what those annotations mean, and if there's edge cases there, and like that stuff that I think both would take a lot more time, and also like the problems are usually just it doesn't compile.
Right.
So it's just the biggest difference is just like needing to pick paths and not try to understand everything. And there's just parts of it that is just a different beast, and different things that are big deals. My intuition just felt a little off.
What would you rank this on a scale of no fun to funner than you expected?
Less fun than I expected.
Less fun than you expected. Why is that?
Yeah, I like came around at the end, but in the middle, I kind of faced a trade-off with this, because in the early weeks, I think the most effective strategy to win this audit and find the most bugs was to focus on the areas that I know would be comprehensible and not try to understand the rest. But I wanted to understand it all. So there was that trade-off where I kind of felt like a time pressure, and like I was burning time, and like I was spending time understanding things that then I didn't find any problems with. That is kind of typical, but just felt like exaggerated. And so I think like at the halfway point, I would have said like much less fun. I'm like not finding anything I want to find. The thing that kind of broke my spirit for a minute was I found an issue, and I think we might have talked about this with Charles, where if a reentrancy lock had a word, like had the like thing be empty, then it wouldn't register, and so it would like register as a reentrancy lock properly, but then when it was building IR, it would say there is no reentrancy lock, don't do anything. And I was so excited finally, and then I looked and it was a security advisory, and it had already been found from like early on in the contest, I guess. And so that was like, oh, I keep going down these rabbit holes, they keep not working, and then I finally got one that worked or whatever.
And somebody else,
and like, yeah. And so then there was a few. There were a few other rabbit holes that I like were like a full day of spent going down and then just like didn't pan out at the end. So like there was just like a lot of like dead ends, and I'm used to finding more faster. Towards the end, as I got in the groove, it's like, okay, now I can see this is kind of fun, but also I'm like, I miss my world of like a simple thing that should be unbreakable, but that I can find one way to break. That's like where I feel like I'm really in my zone. So like, I'm very glad I did it. I learned a ton, and I found it interesting, and I look forward to like continuing to contribute to it. So I'm like glad I'm like in that world and understand it, and I miss Solidity.
Or we got to get you to a point where Vyper feels like a small, easy, simple code base, right?
Oh God.
Because right now, like, you know, you say like, oh, I'm used to like small, easy, simple code bases, and I'm like, Zach, I don't know if you've noticed, I've seen some pretty large, disastrous Solidity code bases.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know how simple some of those are.
I feel like the other thing is like if you're scoping that I know how I scope Solidity in terms of time.
Right.
You know, it's like right before this, I finished I guess like a 7-week audit with Trust on so it's like an 8,500 line of code base, but there's 2 of us over 7 weeks. Like I know every detail of how that thing works. Yeah. Whereas like, so it's just, I'm not used to doing things where I don't get to that level of like, got it all.
Yep. No, makes a lot of sense. What would you say the most fun security review you've ever done has been? It's so interesting. We're talking about like very serious, high lots of money on the line code reviews, and we're like, so which one's the most fun? I feel like that's
fun
so
is all that matters. That's
definitely. Which one was the most fun? What's been the most fun challenge you've ever done?
The highlights in my mind are mostly like the moments breaking something that felt like insurmountable.
Where you're like, I'm a god, everyone else is a peasant. I'm the smartest person on the planet.
Oh my God, I did it. So there's one, God, it sucks. I'm like a couple days away from being able to speak about this, but I can't see the details yet. But there was a bounty that was found. God, it was last December, but shit has dragged out real slow. That was just joyful to find.
Really? Oh, I'm excited.
And yeah, we'll save it for another time. But in terms of private audits, honestly, the thing that comes to mind is most. Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is most like that satisfaction. I guess there's 2. One, I love doing sound XYZ's code because like Vectorize is amazing, and like every time I go down a rabbit hole of like, I think I got him, it's like, oh no, he outdid. Like I like it feels like we're battling, even though he's not there.
I love that. You're like, I think I got him. I'm gonna destroy you. I love that.
I don't know if you feel like this. I definitely like, especially when I was starting, if there's like a developer who I like knew of and the code was impressive, there was like a bit of reverence of like, ooh, I'm not going to go down that path because like they wouldn't screw that up. And I had to like really build in, like sometimes I have to like find like little things that are off and be like, they must be an idiot to screw that up. Yeah, they're an idiot. Like, they were gonna screw everything up. So like, yeah, like the first like 10% is just like building up some disrespect for the dev so that I can trust myself a little more. But so in the first audit I did for them, I was just like, this is flawless, whatever. But I had one idea I kept coming back to, and then found a way to basically like drain all funds from the entire protocol. So that was like, the idea was that they had this bonding curve, and when you could set up like NFT editions to sell on that curve, but there was a way to like slip in a fake contract as an NFT edition and then swap the parameters to move the curve so that you could buy and then swap and then sell. And it could only happen like between two NFT numbers. But if you lined up all those things, you could basically like buy up the curve, jack up the value, and then sell down the curve and steal from every other NFT on the protocol. So there was like a joyfulness of like,
Yep.
I feel so much respect for how rock solid this code is. And there was one big thing and I got it. It was like almost like a CTF, you know?
Yep.
And the other one that was like impossibly good. So I was working on Sablier, the streaming platform.
Yeah.
Again,
Paul
like,
Arberg's. Yep.
It's like the testing. I started looking at it. I'm like, there cannot be a stupid mistake in this because it's so thoroughly tested.
Yeah.
Anything that is found has to be creative. And so I had this idea that I was just banging my head against the wall of like, the protocol used so many unchecked blocks around the amount that had been streamed. I'm like, if I could ever get the streamed amount to go down, that would cause some bad problems. But like, I look at the math, I'm like, there's no way this goes down. Like I like wrote this out on paper, like proved that it couldn't go down. And I just kept coming back to like, but if it could go down. And luckily I was working with Rusty Rabbit, who's amazing, and like was just cleaned up easy issues early on, like was like finding a bunch of the like things that would usually take a lot of time. And I'm like, I got time to go down this rabbit hole. Like it's going to be a waste of time. I know this is useless, but I like can't help myself. And so built this like crazy fuzz test of like, of any possible inputs and parameters, is there a way that the stream amount goes down? And I run it and it's like, no, it's not possible. Like kind of desperate. I'm like, hey, make the fuzz runs higher, do it again. Then it's like failed, like went down. And I'm like, okay, what did I get wrong? Like this didn't actually go down.
Yep.
And so I start like deleting things, isolating it, and eventually it gets isolated to like, you can take the exponent of a number, and if the number goes up, the value goes down. I'm like, that should never happen. Like what? And so ended up kind of like down until I found that there was a problem in the underlying math library where the power function.
Yep, that's right.
If you hit a certain number, it had basically they'd hard coded the like number of zeros to insert in a bit shift or in a like and like bitwise and they'd missed a zero in one of the examples. And like I never would have found that manually reviewing, but because that was found, like the trickle effect was like you could steal a bunch of funds from the protocol, and like it was a really bad issue to happen that wouldn't cause issues for any other protocol that used it, but just this specific use case, it was a disaster. So that one was like incredibly satisfying with like code that's that solid as well.
It's so funny, that duality of like, all right, like I'm here to help you, I'm here to make you more secure, like I'm going to be the good guy here, like you're saying, I'm going to make a difference, but I'm going to destroy you, I'm going to make you look like an idiot, you're going to look like the stupidest dev ever. Like that duality of like, okay, I'm being helpful, I'm being useful, and like that competitive, like I will crush you, I will show you you're the worst coder ever.
Right. I think like and especially like I only really feel that when they're actually incredible devs, which like fortunately a lot of people are, but like it's almost always the situation where I'm like, I know that this is better than anything I could create. It's so thorough, it's brilliant. Like I've worked on dev stuff that got audited. I'm like, even as I wasn't as into security then, but even then I'm like, it's hard to not have mistakes when you're thinking from that creation perspective. And yet in the moment I got to go into that mode of like, this is a battle I have to win.
Yeah, I mean,
which is like, if I was a shitty person, I would just want to be a black hat. It sounds way more fun, but I just like, that's not the life I want to live.
Definitely.
But like, that's like the mentality is much more like I work with a guy who used to work at Raytheon doing like exploit dev for like the CIA kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, I see the appeal of that. Like you want to be breaking shit from the bad guys and like win when you find the problem. That's much more like where my mentality is at.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. Plus that extra competitive push, right? That, you know, being competitive gets that little bit of like, all right, no, I'm gonna
It's
find this.
especially, it kind of messes me up now because like it was nice at the beginning where I'm like, going into any contest, there's like no pressure, like see how I do.
Right. Yeah.
Now
Now
I'm
you have
like, if
expectations.
I don't come first, I'm gonna be filled with shame. So like, I just stay up late tonight.
Yep. That's definitely tough. No, that makes a lot of sense. So you keep saying something that is really interesting, and I know we only have like 8 minutes left here, but you've said almost like a couple times in this, you're like, oh, I had this idea to do X. I had this feeling that there might be something here. Where are those coming from? Where's the little voice in the back of your head being like, hey, no, you got to go down this rabbit hole? Where, like, it almost sounds like you're like picking them out of the sky. You're like, oh, like
Yeah,
I saw that he was using a lot of unchecked, so I was like, maybe you could do some crazy thing here. You went down a rabbit hole, and boom, there's an issue there. Where are these coming from?
I have no idea. Um,
Sick.
yeah,
So all everyone who wants to learn from Zach,
yeah. Tap into God and open the pipeline. I don't know. I do recognize like my first few months doing this, I don't feel like I had any of that. Like even like that big bounty that I mentioned was last December. So I was only like 4 months
right,
into taking it seriously. And it was not at all like moment of insight. It was like it was formal verification. It was like and that used to be how, and I still do it a lot, but like my mind will work in a way that's like, I want to get this outcome. Let me prove to myself that it's not possible. Well, it would only be possible if this thing was true. Well, is it possible? Like, like really saying like, can I say, no, this is not possible? And in that case, it was like, I'm trying to change something and it's not, there's a check that it's not allowed to change. But look, how do they implement the check? Is there any situation you can get around that? Like, just like really like a chess engine that's going through the steps. Um, Whereas now, I don't know, I still do a lot of that when I get like zoomed in on something, but there's a lot more. I think just, I mean, this is what comes from being obsessed with something, right? Like I did a lot of contests. I did a lot of like, oh, I'm not doing any security work right now. I want to like read a bug that happened and like re-implement it in Foundry and run the test because it's like cool to see that it worked at that block. Like just like a lot of seeing what could go wrong. I never really was into the like read past bug reports. I like told myself I should do that and just found it boring. The thing that worked for me was like try my hardest, be like, there is nothing left for me to find, and then see what other people found and be like, what is wrong with me that I didn't find that, and how could I
right,
have approached this differently that I would have? And like
right.
doing that enough times, I don't know. I think like some intuition just develops.
Yeah, I think so. What you're saying is pretty much identical to what Tincho said when we asked him a kind of a similar question. He was like, dude, I've been doing this for years. You see enough bugs, you just start to build this like, oh man, that doesn't smell right over there.
Yeah.
Wait, I feel like I've
Yeah.
something's wrong here, and you can almost just like sniff it out, just doing it
Yeah.
enough, getting that intuition.
The other thing is like it's easy to remember the ones that were right.
Yep.
I cast a wide net. Like if you, I was just recording that Vyper video earlier this week of like
Yep.
walking
Yep.
through the
Yep.
code base, and I was like, oh, it's kind of embarrassing if people see some of my notes because like I'll write some dumb shit in there, being like, hey, I wonder if this clearly impossible thing could ever happen or whatever, right? So like my brain is in a very different place um, when I'm like doing that first pass than later. Like later, I'm like critical and analytical. In that pass, it's just like imaginatory of like, and so like if you, I mean, I think I searched at the end and the number of like at audit tags that I put for myself in the Vyper contest was in the 200s. So it was like everything I read, I was like, look into this more, explore this idea. And so like usually the right thing has to be a part of some of that. Now the question is after, do you have time to go through all of it? And with Vyper, that was harder. But yeah, usually the things that end up being like that are like, it's one of the very large number of maybe this could work ideas. But
Right.
then when I go through and I'm saying like, well, let me like disprove these as fast as I can, there's some that like don't fall into the like, oh, this actually, I can easily show that it is a problem. But don't fall into the like, I can convince myself it's not a problem, and they just sit there. Like I flip mine. They turn green if it's an issue. They turn purple if it's not an issue, and they just sit there red and are like, I kind of want to just like ignore them. So I'm like, there's nothing. I don't know what to do with that, but like, it feels off. I'm not comfortable turning it off. And then that's the stuff that usually like one of them every few audits just turns into something huge.
Yeah. Okay.
And like, that's so much of it is this like the pull to want to turn that off and to be done the contest in 2 days and whatever shit is really strong. Like you feel like it's a waste, but that's like all the upside is like the 10 of those a year that work.
That makes a lot of sense. So that's a little bit more, I feel like that's a little bit more actionable than like, hey, I don't know, God-given talent, right? So everybody who's listening, that's the key right there. Or just get the God-given talent, you know, figure out how to get that. So we have a couple minutes.
I will say one other thing on this, because I like Tincho, he's been doing this for a long time. And like, so he's like absorbed so much. I obviously like, I don't have that level of experience. And so I think he's probably far better than I am at sniffing that out. The thing that helped me go a lot faster is I made such an effort to like work with a lot of people and over communicate with them. And so like the mental shift that I would have over and over of being like, that's how that, like you see inside someone's brain pretty deeply when you start to work with them on stuff like this. And it's like, our brains are real different. Even like, someone who had like find similar stuff to in the end, we're not taking the same path there. And so it's just such a, it's like you read like fiction and you like see a different person's perspective completely. You get to work with someone on this and you're like, oh, that person jumps to this kind of problem. I never make a big deal of that at all. Like, and so there's just this like soaking up of different experiences. One of my big goals for next year is like, I really want to work with the like top people I respect the most more, even if it means earning less. And so, because I just think it's like, it's fun. It makes things like, it just like makes such a good energy, and it's just incredible for learning. Because at this point, I'm not trying to learn facts about the EVM. I'm trying to learn like ways that brilliant people think, and that you can only really pick that up accidentally.
Yeah. So we need to do more, not peer programming, but peer security reviewing. Like that almost should be like mandatory for people who are getting into this. That's actually a good shout. I might add that to my course. That's a great point. You can learn so much faster from syncing up with somebody else and doing the knowledge transfer like that. So we have a couple minutes left here, Zach. I want to ask, it sounded like you were kind of already alluding to this. You think huntooor is super cool, Aztec, what they're doing. What's next for you? Where are you going next? So Vyper contest is wrapping up. We're doing the judging right now. Hopefully you crushed it. I guess we'll find out. What's next for you though?
I've got some private audits lined up this month. I got a baby coming next month, so I'll probably take some time off.
Oh, congrats, man. Oh, that's hella exciting.
I don't know. What I found is like the rhythm of private audits doesn't suit me as well as the rhythm of the like contesty thing. Like I like to like sprint and rest. And it's hard to resist, especially when it's like devs I really respect or projects that are cool. But I think I might drift towards picking the people I really want to work with and doing sprints with them on bounties, as just like, I mean, we'll see if I actually stick with this. And there's not, sometimes stuff like Vyper or other stuff comes up where I'm like, this sounds too fun. I don't care what my other plans were. I'm going to do that. And that seems to be happening more and pulling me away. But loosely, that's the model in my head of like, I want to try and do more like that. And I for sure, I like really, really am impressed with the Aztec team and with what they're building, and think it just unlocks so much cool stuff. So I'm wanting to just like stay. I just built with them, actually. I'm like about to finish a trustless poker game, which is basically there's no centralized entity, just using cryptography. We can like shuffle the deck and determine the cards and keep our hands in private state and play a whole poker game with no involvement from anyone else and no random seed or anything from outside. So I'm not going to deploy it because it doesn't sound legal in America, but it was fun to build. And I'm like thinking about what other stuff I can build that would be useful for them, because I'm just like obsessed with the just like the like the ways that it's architected and what's possible with the way that network is set up is just like, I think there's like a whole wave of unlocks that can happen. So I'm like wanting to stay near the edge of what's possible in that world as well.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, Aztec's been one of the things on my to-do list as well. So, Zach, well, thank you so much for being here. This was awesome. I feel like combination of philosophies, like just getting to see how your brain worked. I feel like this was almost like a pure security audit session, even though we didn't do any auditing. I feel like I learned a ton. Thank you so much for being here. Really looking forward to how you did on the Vyper Competitive Audit. Looking forward to see what's going to come out with your work with Aztec. Good luck with your newborn. That's incredibly exciting. And yeah, looking forward to the future of your bug hunting.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. It was fun.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.